Are they going to let Trump win?
Maybe.
Will they allow it? Right.
Maybe. I think it's a tough decision for them on how far they feel they need to go, because there's always a trade-off between control and legitimacy. And there was already a lot of international attention on the 2020 election. It's almost like, could they run COVID back, right? Like, they were able to get away with all the lies with COVID, all of the corruption of the institutions, and they pulled it off. But it came at a cost of institutional trust. And to this day, there are lingering questions all over the world in countries around electronic voting machines. You know, famously in Brazil, we sent our CIA director, Bill Burns, down to Brazil. We sent our Pentagon director, Lloyd Austin. We had the State Department pull favors with Taiwan to get them the parts for electronic voting machines, and Bolsonaro did not want to use them, casted down on the election. We threatened them. We see, in El Salvador, they're talking about it in many countries in the EU. There's a lot of open questions about what really happened in the 2020 election. And just like I'm not totally convinced that they could do a COVID 2.0 right now, because a lot of the people who did go along with it still feel now like there was something fishy about it. I think there's something similar with this election cycle. Now, I do think they will do at least the standard amount of cheating that is now allowed through mail-in ballots and ballot harvesting. I think there are open questions about the security of our voting machines. They've already rigged it at this point by speed naturalizing all of the illegal immigrants who they've shipped here on taxpayer dime through USAID programs and through DHS programs. So, they've already padded it that way. There are open questions about the electronic voting machines. I mean, it could be that we're in an era where there really are no elections anymore. The fact is the DHS agency that's supposed to be in charge of cybersecurity, CISA, is one of the worst places and most corrupt places in our entire government. They were the ones who orchestrated all of 2020 censorship by saying tweets on the internet are an attack on elections if they question election results. And it's made up of CIA and NSA hackers who migrate over to DHS to protect voting machines. Well, hackers' professional jobs are hacking things and then reporting the vulnerabilities. Well, what if the same people who labeled 100% of the repeat misinformation spreaders on Twitter 1.0 and YouTube and Facebook, what if the people whose apparent sole and exclusive purpose in life is to make sure Trump doesn't win the election, and they have proprietary access to be able to hack electronic voting machines and no one can question them because they are literally the Department of Homeland Security, and this is high-level stuff that can be easily compartmentalized so that there's no oversight. What if they simply hack the voting machines, the group that's supposed to be protecting us from hacking? We see this happen all the time. The 2020 election coup simulator, Transition Integrity Project, planned a coup in the guise of a counter coup. They said, how can we structure a domestic color revolution to kick Trump out of office if he clings to power, if he loses the election, doesn't give up power? We need a coup power to stop his coup. But then they screwed up because scenario 3 of their simulation was called Clear Trump Win. How do we still get him out of office? How do we still make sure he's not inaugurated, even if he clearly wins the election? And so you see this happen time and time again. But I think that the ideal situation, if Trump does win fair and square in the Electoral College, is that they pad the world around him with enough fail-safes. They secure his commitment to infinite funding for Ukraine. They secure his commitment to maximum war with Russia. They secure his cabinet position staffed with blob lackeys that are more loyal to the blob than to the President of the United States. And then simultaneously open several concurrent special prosecutor investigations to make sure the whole term is bogged down in a Mueller probe on steroids. They might settle for that.
This sounds like I've seen this one before. It's a rerun. What's a rerun? Oh wow.
Well, it's a Transformers sequel, so it's bigger, better. It's the same plot line. It's just more explosions.
So they're going to try and do the same thing they did last time. Trump clearly wins in 2016, and they make sure that there are people like John Bolton there holding his nuts.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think it's weird
Nikki
to say
Haley
this.
at State, right? So it's going to be Nikki Haley in charge of State Department.
It's weird to say this, but that's like the best case scenario.
Interesting.
Because I think anything shy of that gets you into assassination town.
Well, I think we're already there. I think the trains hit the station town.
Well, we've already had 2 movies so far, so we're continuing our
Talk about
Transformers
sequels.
theme.
Yeah, talk about sequels. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I want to talk about that. But this is going to be wild for everyone to hear. So for Trump to be allowed to become president, you're saying that he's going to have to go through a super state checklist, tick the boxes, hit all the right notes, sing all the right songs to be allowed to become president. I don't think that's how Americans think our system runs, but you're telling me that's actually the only way that Trump's going to be let into the Oval Office again.
Yeah, this is standard fare. I mean, this is what our State Department does in every other election around the world, and they're just doing this here. I mean, we back channel our diplomats, our ambassadors, and our interlocutors back channel with political parties from both sides of the aisle, or 8 sides of an aisle if it's a multi-party democracy, in order to make sure that the party who is going to rise to power is going to formulate their own foreign policy in a way that's consistent with State Department interests. I mean, a great example of this was Zelensky himself. When Zelensky became the prime minister, became the president of Ukraine in 2019, we sent a very clear message to him right when he took office through something that everyone can look up. It's called the Red Lines Memo. If you look up the Ukraine Crisis Media Center Red Lines Memo, and this was a joint signed letter from 26 different octopus arms of the U.S. State Department. These were all NGOs, civil society organizations, university centers, media outlets, humanitarian groups, but all of them are funded either by the State Department directly or USAID, which serves the State Department. So these were just all the different octopus arms within Ukraine, claiming to be Ukrainian civil society, but they're cutouts of the State Department. And they threatened Zelensky the month he took office with something like 43, 45 different red lines that Zelensky could not cross in terms of his policy for the country unless political destabilization would be unleashed on the administration. Now, political destabilization is the reason Zelensky was president in the first place, because this same State Department USAID apparatus pumped $5 billion into the right sector and Azov paramilitaries that surrounded the Parliament building in January 6th, effectively, if you believe that story. But this was an actual one, except it was sponsored by the United States. They literally surrounded the Parliament building. They were throwing Molotov cocktails in police cars. Of course, we reported it was mostly peaceful. And we destabilized the country. Victoria Nuland herself, the Assistant Secretary for Europe and Eurasian Affairs, and Jeff Pyatt, the U.S. Ambassador, were handing out cookies and water bottles as we did that to destabilize the country, to replace the government. And they said, if you cross any of these red lines, and they were extensive. They were very extensive. It was, you cannot cross this on your oil and gas sector. Here's 7 things you need to do in oil and gas. In the media sector, you are not allowed to have, the Russian-speaking language appear on any public, radio or TV stations. Culture, education, agriculture. It was like a whole list. Security, trade, and it was a threat letter directly that you cannot do those things or else you will be cooed out of office. And this is what we do everywhere. I can tell a million stories on that, but the fact is it's that same apparatus at home here. And this is simply, we've never had, maybe since Andrew Jackson, a choice between a blob and a non-blob candidate for president. Maybe Pat Buchanan in the early 90s, but he didn't come close. He was, I think if he had ever gotten somewhere north of 40% in the polls, he would have gotten the call as well. But Trump may have been the first democratic election that we've had in this country.
That's incredible. JFK?
Well, JFK came from that sort of, Chicago world in class on his way to power, but then he ended up, messing with the bull and getting with the horns when he decided to go against his generals and go against his CIA and go against, this blob apparatus, the foreign policy apparatus, when he gave that, I think it was that famous speech at American University and basically wanted a détente with Russia, and, the CIA perceived that he totally backstabbed them with the Bay of Pigs. This is why you had the strange Cuban connection with the assassination itself. I mean, you had the CIA opening Lee Harvey Oswald's mail for months before the assassination, and we'll get back to this sort of familiar relationship between the CIA and assassins, I think, in a minute here.
Yeah.
But he was skittish on Vietnam. He was skittish on the war with Russia. I remember when I was a Trump speechwriter, Donald Trump asked me to look up what JFK had to say about his generals.
Wow.
To include in a potential speech. And I remember thinking, what are we up against? Because JFK did not have good things to say about his generals.
To this day, Donald Trump, little chin music to the generals, right? Like often kind of like making fun of them and roasting them. And maybe there's something boiling under the surface there that maybe a lot of people don't understand. I mean, for me, it's shocking to hear somebody who's held all of your positions and have seen what you've seen saying, right now there are all these forces that are going to Donald Trump and saying, this is what you're going to do. So you believe that they're just redlining to Trump right now. The Zelensky visit was just a few days ago.
Right.
So was that a red line?
Well, I think, I made the joke that I'm not sure that Trump and Zelensky could even hear each other in the room because there was probably 27 different government agency devices all doing feedback against each other when you put multiple microphones next to each other. Because the Pentagon's trying to figure out what they're saying, the CIA, the NSA.
It sounds like old dial-up internet.
Exactly. But
get off the line.
Right. Well, Trump has been very close, has kept this closely guarded secret about how exactly he intends to negotiate an end to the war with Russia, because we overthrew the government in Ukraine in 2014 in order to secure our hold over the eastern part of Ukraine and to privatize the assets there and to take all the $14.4 trillion in resources over that portion. And then that party was ruined with this 2022 operation from Russia that ended up seizing a large chunk of the Donbass, which it's the exact area that was of concern in terms of the resource, because most of the population is in the western part of Ukraine, but most of the resources are in the east. And so they invaded the exact resource territory that Burisma had all the mining rights to. Ironically, the shale resources east of the Dnieper River and then the Black Sea offshore shale resources are now lost because Crimea joined the Russian Federation. So we don't want peace, and by we I mean the State Department, the diplomats, the White House, unless it steps back the world to how it was in 2014. And Russia will not give that back for any number of reasons. One, because they don't have to. They feel like they're winning, or at least have acquired victories in this, and without assurances, and maybe even with assurances, they wouldn't give it back. And so I think this is what's behind the escalation right now with these long-range missiles, precision-guided strikes into Russia itself. Ukraine now doing incursions directly into the Russian Federation territory. I think they are escalating it in order to try to give Russia something to lose so that when they have these negotiations, they can achieve that. They can reverse the losses and go back to the world as it was immediately post-2014 coup. But so if Trump agrees to a peace deal in the world as it is right now, he might get assassinated. Like if he were to just say, okay, the war's over right now, the world is as it is. The West controls Western Ukraine and parts of Eastern Ukraine, but all of the sections of the Donbass, Crimea, that whole region is now, we're back to the Minsk Accords. We're back to this sort of, a peace thing, and we're going to put down the arms, and we'll go back to relatively normal trading relations. I think if he were to agree to that on the face of it, we'd see what J.D. Vance is like as president of the United States for a period, and then whoever J.D. Vance. I mean, that's what's happening right now with the Ryan Routh Ukraine situation, and that is, it's not an uncommon occurrence anymore. Almost every major political leader of a populist movement in the country, in the world right now, has been physically assaulted, shot, or stabbed. Bolsonaro was stabbed, right in the stomach while he was president, while the State Department was orchestrating this coup to get him out of office. Then they immediately sicked the legal system on him. Right? He's under indictment right now for the way he handled COVID and a dozen other felony counts. So they did the same, shoot, stab, and prosecute that they did to Bolsonaro as to Trump. Shinzo Abe is dead in Japan. The leaders of the AfD party in Germany have been stabbed or shot at in the face or in the body. You've seen the same thing. Imran Khan was stabbed as well, and they did the same thing to Imran Khan. The U.S. State Department, everyone can look this up on The Intercept right now, who published portions of this classified cable that leaked. Imran Khan was the Trump of Pakistan. He was the most popular Pakistani prime minister the country ever had, and he was cooed out of office by the U.S. State Department because, in the State Department's words, he took an aggressively neutral position on Russia and was allowing Pakistan. So Pakistan is the big military transshipment point into Romania and therefore into Ukraine. It's a giant CIA zone. We're going to come to this later in the story when we talk about Ryan Routh, because he was all over Pakistan in this whole operation. But Imran Khan was, again, this popular prime minister. The State Department back-channeled with his diplomats who betrayed him and with the Pakistani ISI, the intelligence service, as well as the Pakistani generals, and threatened them with, quote, carrots and sticks, basically bribes if they impeached Imran Khan out of office in a no-confidence vote. It's basically their version of an impeachment. And that all would be forgiven in Washington if they decided to go through with this vote, and that they would basically be getting billions in aid money if they did it. We basically bribed the sitting factions of the sitting government to oust the government and replace it with a U.S. vassal presidency. And then as soon as Imran Khan was deposed in this no confidence vote, the State Department swooped in and said, you can't hold elections for, because if you hold elections again this year, Imran Khan's just going to win again. Stop me where that sounds familiar. For example, Ukraine has not had an election in 4 years and is not going to have one in the foreseeable future. So tell me if this starts to sound like a stock and trade of the exact locus targeting Trump, where we just straight up cancel elections. But then immediately is when they canceled elections, they put Imran Khan under indictment. He's currently sitting in a jail cell after being hit with 195 felony charges. Marine Le Pen is currently facing 10 years in prison. Matteo Salvini is currently facing 20 years in prison. The Prime Minister of Slovakia, who also was threatening to make Slovakia no longer a vassal state of Washington foreign policy, because Slovakia plays this key role in the pipeline architecture connecting Poland to Ukraine for all the North American gas that they're replacing Russian gas with. So they need Slovakia. Slovakia had a new election. The new guy didn't want to go along with it. Magically, he got shot in the body by a George Soros, ardent reporter and a journalist for a George Soros mag. But once again, you have a blob shooter. But this is now stock and trade. we're told by Matt Gaetz that there's 5 separate assassination teams that are currently hunting down Trump and trying to find angles on him. Of course, the 2 that already happened were solo dolo. No teams there around Matthew Crooks. No teams there around Ryan Routh. But by the way, you can't see the text messages. You can't see the social media. But you know, all 5 they're tracking are in teams. But anyway, I'm sort of digressing there. But yes, I think that the main thing that Trump can or will get assassinated over is his disagreement with the blob on foreign policy as it applies to Eurasia.